Good morning, viewers, and welcome to my channel. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and follow for more interesting content. Today, we'll be talking about one very famous person, Gian Lorenzo Bernini. He wasn't just any normal artist. He was the main artist of the Catholic Church. Favored by many popes like Urban VII, Bernini was given the most important commissions in Rome at a time when the Church needed to reassert its power and reconnect with the faithful after the Protestant Reformation. But here's the thing. Bernini didn't just create beautiful objects or sculptures, he created experiences. He understood that art had to move people, not just impress them. His works were designed to pull the viewer in and make them feel something real. His sculptures feel alive, and his spaces feel like you've just stepped into a scene. Coming back from St. Peter's Basilica right now, this effect that Bernini creates is never more visible than inside the basilica. Rising above the main altar is that massive St. Peter's baldacchino with its twisting columns, its massive scale, and it is just impossible to ignore. It dominates the space just as Bernini dominated the artistic world of Rome. But here's the funny part. People have started coming up with these accusations against Bernini, saying that he shouldn't be the one taking all the credit, and without Borromini's help, especially in solving important engineering challenges, this baldacchino would have never come to fruition. I agree that Bernini did help in the process, but here's the key point. They helped build it, but Bernini created it. The vision, the impact, the way it transformed the space, all that comes from him. So in the end, the credit goes to the one who gave it its vision and lasting impact.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Borromini, one of the most important Baroque artists and architects. Borromini was born in 1599 in a Swiss stone-cutting village. He moved to Rome in 1619, where he was quickly recognized for his genius and his architectural innovativeness. Borromini worked on some of the most important works in all of Rome, including St. Peter's and St. John Lateran. Borromini's new and innovative way of creating spaces was incredible. He liked to lift the mind up to the heights of his buildings, just as the mind is lifted up to intellectual truths about our faith. Borromini was the one who architecturally designed the baldacchino of St. Peter's Basilica. And if it weren't for his genius, the baldacchino would not be standing today.
And that's why I believe that Bernini should take the credit for St. Peter's baldacchino.
That's why Borromini deserves full credit for the baldacchino of St. Peter's Basilica.
What did you just say right now?
Talking about Borromini. Like the best architect and architect of the Baroque period.
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Have you ever heard of Bernini?
Yeah, I've heard of it before, but who cares?
I've heard all these controversies before, again and again. People say that Borromini should get credit for the baldacchino.
As you should.
No, absolutely not. When you go to St. Peter's and when you see that baldacchino, don't you just stand there in awe and gaze and you're just like, wow.
Yeah, I do, and I wonder, wow, what would have happened if Borromini didn't design this structurally sound? It would have fallen over.
Okay, so it's structurally sound, but who designed it? Who gave it that amazingness?
Borromini, because it's still there today, obviously.
Okay, wait. Have you ever been to the sculpture of the Ecstasy of St. Teresa?
I have before. Have you ever been to St. John?
Wait. Have you? No. Have you been there? And you have been like, wow, I feel part of this scene. Right when St. Teresa appears, I feel like I'm here. I can feel all the emotions. Do you know who does that? Bernini.
Yeah, and you know who raises your mind to the heights of intellectual truth about faith? Borromini.
Okay. See. I think my viewers are already bored about our argument right now. You know what we could do? I have this friend who is also a big fan of Bernini. I think what we could do is we could do a small debate with each other. I think our viewers would really, really love that. What do you think?
Sure. I'm up for a little bit of competition, so that's fine. Borromini's gonna win anyways.
Okay, hey, let's see the best group win. Okay.
Well, hey, when we're used to, we'll have a couple rounds of thinking.
Okay.
First, we can talk about this emotion intellect thing.
Okay.
Then, we can talk about architecture, state, design, space, and ultimately, we're going to decide who influenced the church in the best possible way. I think that's probably the most important thing.
I think that sounds great. I think our viewers will love that.
Alright.
Let the best group win, bro.
Game on, man.
To start off the category of emotion versus intellect, I am going to start with the sculpture of the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. When you first see the sculpture, you immediately realize that this is not simply a sculpture, but an experience. And I'm probably going to say the word experience like 10 times in this video, but bear with me, you're going to soon see why. In this sculpture, the marble seems like it's alive, like it's moving and breathing. And this work, created by Bernini in the mid-17th century, depicts a vision described by Saint Teresa of Avila. In her writings, Teresa talks about an encounter with an angel who pierces her heart with a golden spear, filling her not with pain, but with an overwhelming love from God. Bernini captures this exact moment, the instant where the human and the divine meet in a way that is deeply spiritual and intensely physical. And believe me when I say, when I first saw the sculpture, I was at a loss of words. What makes this work so powerful is not just the story, but the way Bernini constructs it. Teresa's face is full of emotion, her body relaxed, mouth slightly open, as if she's caught between earthly and heavenly experience. The angel looks calm and gentle, which makes the moment feel even more intense. Above them, a hidden light pours down, watching these glowing rays, creating the illusion that seems directly lit by man. But this isn't just coincidence. Bernini has carefully engineered through a concealed window so the natural light floods the figures, blending the golden rays and bringing just this full scene to life. Bernini doesn't just stop with the sculpture. He goes even further by transforming the entire chapel part of the work. This space, which is created by Cardinal Federico Cornaro, not only to honor St. Teresa, but also to celebrate the Cornaro family itself. On either side of the chapel, members of the family are carved into boxes like they're sitting in a theater, watching the scene. But these are not just ordinary portraits. Their faces show surprise and awe, just like what the viewers might feel. Bernini turns them and us, the viewers, into part of us. This is why many describe the chapel as a sacred theater. Everything from sculpture to the architecture to the painting and even to the light comes together into this single experience. Even the ceiling adds to this, with the clouds and the angels that seem to break out of space, expanding the space into something infinite. The sculpture itself does not rest firmly on the ground, but appears to look like it's floating on clouds, lifting Teresa into this whole other world. Bernini sculpts Teresa's body in a way which it almost seems to disappear under the folds of her robes, showing the viewers that this scene is not something you see every day, but very, very unique and special in itself. Bernini's skill is in making all of this feel natural. You don't think about how it's made. You just feel it. He doesn't just show you something. He makes you experience. And that is why Bernini is superior to Borromini under the category of emotion versus respect. His work speaks to you right away. You don't need background knowledge, but theology or art history to understand it. You feel it instantly. The emotion hits you before you even have time to think. And that, as I've said before, that was really important during the process of Reformation. When the Catholic Church needed to reconnect, art needed to be clear, powerful, and easy to understand, and Bernini is exactly that. His work speaks to everyone. On the other hand, Borromini operates on a more intellectual level, and I'll give it to him. His buildings are creative and complex, because they often take time to understand and fully appreciate. You have to stop and think about them. And while that can be impressive, it also creates this distance. We, the viewers, remain outside of the work, engaging with it like an observer rather than experiencing it. But Bernini, he removes that distance. His work pulls you in. You don't just look at it, you feel like you are a part of it. One speaks to the mind, while the other to the whole person. And that's why I believe Bernini wins in the debate of emotion versus intellect. He shows that the strongest kind of communication isn't something you have to figure out, but it's something you feel right away.
Round one of Borromini, we're going to be focusing on intellect over emotions. Borromini liked to use complex shapes and designs in his architecture that make you think and are intellectually stimulating. But that's not all for show. They point to the higher truths of our faith, as we'll see in a minute. First, I want to give some context and background. This church is San Carlino alle Quattro Fontane, or St. Charles at the Four Fountains. The Four Fountains were commissioned by Pope Sixtus V in 1588 to bring water to pilgrims at these important intersecting pilgrimage roads. 50 years later, in 1638, Borromini was commissioned by the Trinitarian order to build this church. This was Borromini's first solo commission, and he was so excited to start making a name for himself as an architect that he offered to complete the church free of charge. This would be a huge challenge because he is working in a very limited space. There already exists a fountain on the corner where he is building the church, and there are other buildings that he is working around. There are also the two pilgrimage roads that already exist that he's working around. So he's working in a very limited space here. Of course, Borromini is up for the challenge, and he constructs this masterpiece of Baroque architecture in this limited space. The church is only 66 feet wide and 39 feet long. Looking at the facade of the building, it immediately stands out from any other facade. The facade undulates in and out, creating a sense of movement that is very characteristic of the Baroque period. The convexes and concaves are in threes, symbolizing the Trinity, which is a very prominent theme here because of its commissioning by the Trinitarian order. The undulating of the facade brings the eyes upward to the medallion in the center, where Mary is depicted being crowned by the Trinity. That's the whole point of the architectural complexity. It draws us back to those truths of our faith, Mary as our Queen and Mother, and the Holy Trinity. We'll see that in just a moment on the inside as well. Before moving inside, it is also worth noting that Borromini created a second, smaller facade on the side where the fountain already is, incorporating that into his building and working with the limited space that he has. Moving to the interior of the building, we have an oval-shaped floor plan of the church. The undulating style is once again present on the interior walls. Even the panels, coffers, and apses all seem to be moving. There aren't any straight lines here. The movement of the building draws the eyes upward again towards the oval-shaped dome. Within the dome, there are even more geometrical complexities, octagons, crosses, and hexagons, rather than square coffers. Borromini is taking the dome of the Pantheon and adding new complexity and depth. Looking straight at the top of the dome, you see the Holy Spirit and a triangle. From this perspective, the light at the top of the dome seems to be coming from the Trinity itself, because Borromini masterfully hides the windows that allow the light to enter, creating that effect. Looking at the floor plan, we have two equilateral triangles whose sides touch. Within these triangles are circles and an oval that closes in the circles and goes around both of them. Even within his limited space, Borromini still finds room to include side chapels, a rectangular sacristy, and stairs down to the crypt below, all connected to a courtyard connecting the cloister of the Trinitarian order. The point of this all is not just to be intellectually stimulating or to make Borromini look cool, although it definitely does. It all points to those higher truths. The undulating and the movement brings our eyes up to the dome, where we are pointed to the complexity of God, who is both one and three. The floor plan includes triangles, a symbol of the Trinity and threeness, and yet also includes circles, symbols of unity and oneness. Everything points our mind back to God and the truth that He is both one and three. During the time shortly after the Reformation, when intellectual clarity is so greatly needed, Borromini constructs this church instilled with depth and meaning, all pointing back to the Trinity. And he does that in a cramped space between busy pilgrim roads and existing buildings and fountains. I'd like to see Bernini try and do anything like that.
Alright, Patrick, thanks for your argument. Let's see if mine's better. Let's discuss Bernini's interior authority of St. Peter's Basilica. Borromini always wanted architecture to be something puzzling, something confusing for the mind, but we want it to be entertaining, something to experience. And that's what Bernini does. Look around the Basilica. You might see just a church, but I would say it's more than that. It's a place of theology, it's an empire, it's a place of pilgrimage, all compressed into one overwhelming space. At the center of the entirety of the space stands John Lorenzo Bernini, son of Pietro Bernini, brother of Luigi Bernini, but enemy of Borromini. Nike versus Adidas, Apple versus Samsung, Bernini versus Borromini. There's practically no difference. Let's discuss now the Baldacchino, built between 1624 and 1633 under Pope Urban VIII. Bernini places a bronze canopy directly over the tomb of St. Peter himself. The entire basilica snaps into a vertical focus, a vertical dynamic. The tomb is below, the altar above, Michelangelo's dome overhead. Earth comes into heaven. The apostle Peter comes to the Pope. Now that's not decoration, I would say it's authority and creativity. Now the twisting columns of the Baldacchino. Bernini brings in the temples of Solomon. He connects the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. The motion replaces the stillness of the Baldacchino. The church becomes alive, right? Borromini never understood that type of movement. We also know that Bernini made 10 times more money than Borromini, because Borromini could calculate geometry all day long, but Bernini, he understood drama. Even the materials of the Baldacchino, they become propaganda. The bronze came partly from the Pantheon, which caused the Romans to complain. They would say, what the barbarians did not do, Bernini did do. But honestly, that controversy, I would say it helped Bernini, because pagan Rome was literally melted down and transformed to a Christian triumph. Right? We also have the famous legend that Bernini left his rosary on the base while working on the Baldacchino, which is super dope. And he forgot it there. But to this day, on the rear left column of the base, there appears to be still the golden rosary painted onto the structure itself. Whether the story is true or false, it doesn't matter, because people wanted it to be true, because Bernini's art touched the heart of the viewer. It touched them personally. After the Baldacchino, Bernini then built the chair of St. Peter. The chair completely destroys all categories of space, right? Is it architecture? Is it a sculpture? Is it a thing of theology? Well, I would say it's a mixture of all, right? The bronze throne extends upward into the clouds. There's angels, there's gilded rays, there's stained glass, right? Beautiful. And the Holy Spirit glows like a supernatural sunrise. The entire apse, it dissolves into its own light. Now, Rudolf Whitaker, right, one of our readings from class, he described the Baroque as the unity of the arts in the service of persuasion. Bernini doesn't want to analyze just the space calmly, but he wants you to be overwhelmed. He wants your senses to be persuaded. Compared to this, Borromini, he can feel almost cold. Brilliant he might be, but his artwork is emotionally cold. Now, Borromini's son Carlino, hence its name, it's the size of a janitor's closet. It's incredibly small and petite. There's no bronze, there's no gold, there's no money inside of the church. It's incredibly poor, from the Trinitarians, of course. Now, Borromini even offered his work for free. Why? Because his name was not known in the street. Nobody knew who he was. He even ordered a man to be killed in St. John Lateran. Sorry, Joe. He couldn't even finish his church at St. Philip Neri. And during the post-Reformation of the Council of Trent, art had to move the faithful, right? Borromini couldn't do that. Bernini, he could teach the faithful through emotion. A simple altar would not be enough to accomplish that. A church wanted a spectacle with a purpose. Now, Borromini, he made architecture for architects. But Bernini, he made his architecture for the mind, right, of a universality. Now, the monument to Pope Urban VIII contains many bees, resembling divine wisdom from the Barberini coat of arms, and it feels energetic.
The Pope raises his hand as if he's still ruling after death. Bernini himself was young, successful, he was unstoppable, he had everything he could have wanted. Bernini, he seems to be cutting into wax or to a stick of butter. Borromini, the same cannot be said about him. By the time that he works on the tomb of Pope Alexander VII, his mood changes completely, because Bernini had experienced the death of his own father, right, Pietro Bernini. And that sudden mortality became unavoidable, became present in his life. Now, Alexander VII in his tomb is kneeling in prayer while death physically emerges beneath him, holding an hourglass. Time is running out. The marble drapery of Pope Alexander VII, it spills into our own space as the viewer, as our observer. And surrounding the Pope are the great virtues of charity, prudence, justice, and truth. Truth is fascinating. She's stepping on a globe. She presses up against it. And Bernini places her foot right near the Protestant England, almost like a visual wound in the body of Christianity. Now, that's not subtle. It's very obvious. It's in front of the viewer. Even more extraordinary than that is Saint Longinus. Bernini captures the exact instant of his conversion, right? He's placed in the transept of St. Peter's Basilica. St. Longinus, who had pierced, right, he's the soldier, of course, who had pierced, he had spat upon, mocked, and left, nailed Christ to the cross. He suddenly recognized who Christ truly was, his presence. Now he explodes with kinetic energy. His drapery flies, his arms are open, he has vulnerability. His stone becomes emotion to the viewer. And now that's the difference between Bernini and Borromini. Borromini builds intellectually, right? But Bernini, he builds spiritually, with emotion, and he builds theatrically. Borromini, he asks you to admire the structure. Bernini makes you feel heaven breaking into the room, to your own heart, and to your own soul.
Now we move on to round two for Borromini, and we're going to take it to the Lateran. So Bernini's work on St. Peter's is very flashy, really pretty, but I think that Borromini's work on the Lateran is way, way more impressive for many reasons. Joseph Connors reminds us that Pope Innocent X hired Borromini to renovate the Lateran for the 1650 Jubilee. And this was not an easy project for Borromini because he had to renovate an already existing structure. But not only that, he was incredibly limited on what he had to do. He couldn't touch the ceiling because Pope Innocent wanted that to stay. Couldn't touch the floor because Pope Innocent wanted that to stay. And he couldn't touch the transept because Pope Innocent wanted that to stay. So he had to unify the church without being able to touch a lot of the major aspects of the church. So what he did was he made a lot of arches, and he unified all the 12 pillars into 6 pillars, which we're going to show you in the videos that follow.
Great. Moving inside, we'll look first at the counter facade that Borromini designed for the Lateran. As you can see, it has the typical white look that he was known for, and yet he still has the colored marble for the doors in which the apostles are stationed. You also see everything kind of moves upward. The video is trying to show this, and it draws the eye to that central window where you immediately see the papal crest with the tiara and the 2 keys, really emphasizing that this is the Pope's cathedral, and this is where he rules the Diocese of Rome. There's also 4 pilasters that frame the space, which is very uncharacteristic of Borromini, with these right angles, with really the only rounded edges being above the door. Looking between the pilasters and the door are palm branches, which is a common symbol for martyrdom and the triumph of the saints who have been martyred. Another interesting fact would be the palms sticking out of the space, of course very characteristic of the Baroque period. Also, the doors in which the apostles are stationed are sticking out with that pointed segmented pediment, which is also found right above the window. These doors that the apostles are in, as I've already said, are uncharacteristic of Borromini because they use the colored marble, which can be found in St. Peter's. So he certainly would have been familiar with it from the projects he would have had there. However, he definitely preferred the white marble. It is important to note that the 12 apostle statues themselves were not made by Borromini. In fact, they were not made until the 17th century. However, Borromini did design the spaces that they inhabit. And the spaces are meant to recall the 12 gates to the New Jerusalem in heaven. You can see that there are doors behind the apostles, that there's a little indent that's rectangular to recall those gates. Just a final note, at the pointed pediment at the top is a dove, just reminding that the Holy Spirit is the one guiding the apostles in the church. The square images above the apostles were originally meant to be temporary. Borromini did not mean for them to stay as they have. He wanted them to be replaced by other images, but of course they are still here. So the right side facing the altar of the church is New Testament, and the left side is Old Testament. According to the Lateran's own website, these stucco reliefs show how the Old Testament prefigures the New Testament in a very clear and distinct manner for catechesis. One of the things I find to be the most interesting are the side aisles that Borromini designed. They're very simple. They have these large arches between the pilasters, and they center on a circle held up by angels, very reminiscent of heaven, and also very reminiscent of how Borromini will start with a geometric shape and build off of that as he designs his architectural spaces. There are also many very bright windows in these spaces that really light up the space, especially with the whitewashed look. A small but fascinating detail about these side aisles is that they all lead to the altar, which of course was in accord with what St. Charles Borromeo wanted. Here we see the angels looking at the altar as these angels look towards the tabernacle. With all these details in mind, I bring this view of the Lateran nave from the back. You can see the 12 doors of the 12 apostles, and it really feels like they're entering into the space, reminding you that you are entering into a heavenly liturgy when you enter the church. Further, the ceiling and the floor blend seamlessly with the walls that Borromini designed, and he really unified the space into one unit. And the altar is the centerpiece. You can see it, it's clear, it is the focus. Even though he wasn't the one that designed it, he made that the focus of the entire space, as it should be. This view of the nave is really the thesis statement for the Lateran and Borromini's ability to take what was really a mess and make it into one beautiful space. The union with the ceiling, I think, is particularly impressive because the pilasters really just run into it and seamlessly mold into it, looking like it's just holding it up like it was always designed that way. All of this really allows a moment of shock when you walk into the basilica, and your eyes, of course, like I said, immediately go to the altar. So all the pilgrims, when they come for the 1650 Jubilee, will know exactly what they are in this space for, that they are part of the heavenly Jerusalem, that they are part of the heavenly liturgy, and the focus is on Christ.
As you can see in the previous videos, Borromini did a great job restoring St. John Lateran, especially with all the challenges he faced, and he really was able to maintain what Pope Innocent X wanted, which was to maintain the old church and not restart it like they did in St. Peter's, which really gives him one up over Bernini, because Bernini had a clean slate at St. Peter's, whereas Borromini had to restore a church that already existed and has already gone over restoration many times in its history. Joseph Connors recounts how many people did critique Borromini's work, but some of them also celebrated it. He himself refers to his work as taking a medieval ruin and encasing it in a Baroque reliquary, which I think is a very apt description for what Borromini was able to accomplish here at the Lateran.
Alright, Joe. Thank you for your argument. Tony the Tiger, back here again. Now let's discuss Bernini's urban theater. Right. If we say that St. Peter's is the heart of the Catholic Church, then I would argue that Bernini, he designed the heartbeat, right? Before Bernini, the approach to St. Peter's, it was awkward, it was fragmented, it was uncomfortable for the individual to enter. There was no heartbeat, right? And the greatest church in Christianity St. Peter's, had no true proper entrance. Bernini changes that completely. Built between 1656 and 1667 under Pope Alexander VII, he created the Piazza and Colonnade of St. Peter's, one of the greatest examples of urban theater in history. And the key word is theater. Bernini himself, he described the colonnade as the maternal arms of Holy Mother Church embracing humanity. And the massive oval piazza, it reaches outward like an embrace, welcoming all the pilgrims into the spiritual center of Catholicism. And this was during the Counter-Reformation. Now that matters because the geometry that Bernini uses is intentional, and the shape is important. It creates movement, not stillness. When you stand in Bernini's piazza, you participate in that movement. Your body moves through the space. Now that's why Bernini succeeds, or Borromini often struggles. Borromini's spaces, they can feel psychologically tense, compressed. Borromini, he thinks cinematically before centuries before cinema even existed. So props to him for that. But for Bernini, the Doric columns are massive, stretching outward in 4 rows, crowned by over 100 saints. The church triumphant, that is the saints, those in heaven, are literally watching over the faithful below, the church militant. Now everything directs your eyes toward the facade of St. Peter's, built by Cardinal Bernini. Right? It's towards Rome. It's also towards Bernini's interior authority, which was discussed earlier. Now Todd Martyr, one of the professors at Rutgers University, he described the piazza as a ritualized spectacle for the pilgrims. Now, whether you're Catholic, Protestant, Anglican, whatever, Bernini controls the emotional rhythm of your arrival. He compresses and he expands his art for the viewer in a personal manner. You feel welcome before you even enter the basilica. Now that raises an obvious question. Why would Pope Sixtus V want to preserve a pagan monument? Well, because Baroque Rome does not erase history, but rather, it conquers it and it absorbs it, it triumphs it. Now also, we know that the obelisk once stood at the martyrdom location of St. Peter. Now in the 16th century, Domenico Fontana, he moved it there with an engineering feat, with hundreds of animals, hundreds of workers, 900 to be exact. Now that obelisk helps to transform Bernini's piazza itself. The pagan Rome, what it used to be, becomes Christian Rome. The fountains reinforce the entire experience. The water symbolizes purification, life, renewal, and the symmetry creates balance within the enormous space itself. The sound softens the scale of the piazza, and it makes the monumental feel human, to touch the soul. Now, Bernini understood something that Borromini never fully mastered. Architecture was not just about the walls and geometry, but no, it's about the human behavior. It's about how people can move, feel, and gather themselves through the art. Now, Palazzo Barberini, Borromini's staircase is extraordinary. It's incredible. The windows are cool too. Now, Borromini, he could play with the geometry in a frightening manner. It was brilliant, exceptional. But there's a difference between him and Bernini, between the brilliance and the greatness. Now, Borromini speaks to the individual intellect, but Bernini, he speaks to the entire world. Now, that is why pilgrims flooded into St. Peter's Square 4 centuries after it opened, and they understand what Bernini wanted them to feel. He wanted them to feel welcomed, feel overwhelmed, and drawn towards something that's larger than themselves, the divine.
Dude, but see, that's my point though. Like, after you and Storms broke down the church, the Lateran Church and St. Charles Church, I did not know there was so much behind Borromini's architecture. But it doesn't appeal to the ordinary viewer, and that's what Bernini exactly does. He supported the church during the Protestant Reformation of appealing to the ordinary viewer, and that's why I fully support Bernini. Do you have anything to say to that?
Honestly, you're totally right. I mean, I agree. There's a reason why this church right here is visited every day by thousands and thousands of people, and the Lateran is not. Because Bernini knew what he was doing. He put the church and what it taught first, and he really just made the face of the church. St. Peter's, I mean, there's no better icon for the Catholic Church around the world. And I really think Bernini just takes the cake on this one. The Baldacchino, maybe in Borromini, we can duke out who gets the credit for that. But I mean, Bernini obviously helped the church the most.
Well, viewers, I think we have a winner. Bernini it is. Hey, good competition.